This happened a few years back. I was 11 years old at the time, with my family driving in the middle of nowhere, Montana. It was also the middle of the night in the dead of winter. We used to own this place in the literal middle of nowhere, and every once in a while we'd drive out and spend a week fishing, camping, and hiking. So we were driving back towards civilization, and everyone was tired. Big walls of snow were on either side of the road. Beyond the dirty snowbanks, you could see thick tree lines. We were cruising along, climbing up over this mountain pass. I remember I had half my forehead pressed up against the cold glass while I tiredly watched what little snow and nature I could make out in the dark. Then I saw this person. I will always remember her as a female. Maybe that's just what I settled on in my head, but either way, they were wearing a tattered coat, multiple layers, and carrying a couple of big bags. I remember seeing a flash of a cold face. I wasn't the only one to see her though. My dad mumbled, "See that? Must be freezing out there." And my mom said something like, "Maybe we should give them a ride." But we were already a half-mile away. So we got to the top of this mountain. I could tell because I got that feeling in my ears, and we began the descent down to the other side. The driving conditions were not great, but the old family car was doing just fine. We leveled out a bit, and I started scanning the distance for any signs of a city, town, or anything. Still nothing but snow and trees out there. We were totally alone. We began the real descent, and we started winding down this mountain pass. I was staring out the window at the snow and trees as the drive got scary. We hadn't passed a car for what seemed like hours. I remember my dad started talking about something, and that's when I saw her again, standing out in the snow. I got a brief glimpse when they were illuminated by the headlights, but then gone. This time I got a better look at her face, and I wish I hadn't. A really strange smile in the middle of a very disfigured face. Maybe she was a horrible burn victim. In that brief second, I couldn't get the image out of my head, but it felt like she was staring right at me, smiling, some messed up kind of understanding in her small black eyes. So we drove on for a bit, and I remember just staring out the window. It immediately struck me. How did she get there? How did she travel miles and miles and miles in front of us? We didn't pass a car, truck, or anything, and there wasn't really any other road out there. We eventually got to the bottom of that mountain and made it to some roadside motel where we stayed for the night. The next morning, we found this little diner right outside the town that we stayed in. It was a classic trucker's stop type of diner. We ate and played I Spy. After the bill was paid and we zipped up our coats, I heard the doors chime. We were all heading out when I looked up and saw her again. The same coat, the dozens of hooded sweaters, the big bags filled with what looked like damp clothing. I was walking out behind my dad, and I remember that she gave this look at me as she passed. She really looked like she hated me, like she knew things I didn't, looking at me with that huge disfigured smile. She stopped beside me, but I stayed behind my dad until we got in the car. I don't know what really was going on. I couldn't help but feel bad for her if she was truly lost out there walking for miles in the cold, or maybe someone had hurt her. Probably a dozen of explanations for the whole experience, but I can't shake the weird feeling like she was following us. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to storms farther north, we traveled straight west instead of northwest at first and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we were far enough north, we turned west onto I-90. At that point, it had been over an hour since we saw anywhere that might have had a public restroom, and we were on state routes, so no rest areas. Those of you who have traveled with a young child know the bladder and boredom limit isn't very long, and our daughter was begging to stop somewhere to pee. South Dakota was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reached a desperately needed rest stop as my 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pulled in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in as well. I didn't think too much of it at first until I started to open my door. My head was turned to the right where the truck was parked just a couple of spots over. My eyes met with the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy, scraggly gray-brown beard, and dark eyes. I could see that he was wearing a dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband that I didn't want to go into the rest stop alone because of the guy and the weird feeling that I got from him. My husband thought that I was being a little silly, but agreed to come with us. At that point, the next stop was the town of Walls, South Dakota, about 100 miles away still, according to the huge billboards we'd passed advertising it. My husband figured he'd better empty his bladder, even though he didn't particularly feel the need. I grabbed our daughter and we headed inside, followed by the guy who had been rummaging in his truck and wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and headed back out into the lobby. As I expected, my husband was already out there, since he didn't have a small human to chaperone. The old guy was also in the tiny lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushed us back out to our car. As we were buckling in, he locked the doors. Then he told me that the guy hadn't even gone to the restroom and was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might have just had a close call, and he was glad that it hadn't just been me and our daughter to go in there. However, that's not the end of the story. That 100-mile drive to Wall was pretty easy with empty landscaping, but a decent number of turnoffs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought that the whole episode was behind us, except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some road snacks, plus look at this fun little tourist trap in the middle of nowhere. We saw the guy in the store not even 20 feet away from us. Same face, beard, and dirty plaid shirt. Thankfully, we'd already eaten, so since he was staring at us again, we quickly paid for our snacks and trinkets and got out of there. We didn't see him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming safely with no other sight of that man or his truck. It was about 2000 or 2001, and my best friend and I were 13 years old. We lived in a small town in rural Minnesota of about 2,000 people. Out of our friend group, her and I were the only two who lived out in the country, farther away from the small town out in the middle of nowhere. So we understood the boredom that could ensue, but the fun things that would come out of it. Exploring the woods, running around in the cornfields, creating forts, exploring the abandoned house on their property. It was a really fun time for us. One day, we decided to take our bikes and ride down some gravel roads. Her little brother tagged along, and he was probably about 9 or 10 at the time. We were riding along, laughing, probably picking on her brother, when we saw an old shack out in one of the cornfields. The corn wasn't fully grown, so we were able to see most of it. We decided to explore it, because why not? I'm 33 now, so bear with my memory. I don't remember much about the episode, but I do remember what I saw inside, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. We peered inside, and the first thing we noticed were posters on the walls of the room. They were on every wall. There was a different person on every poster, and they looked angry. Some held guns pointed right at you. Some were pointing their finger, and it felt like they were pointing right at us with their eyes trained on us. In the center of the floor was a perfectly painted red circle. As we were staring at this creepy scene, I felt like we were being watched, and not by the posters. I looked to my right across the gravel road and into the cornfield across from us. Standing in the middle of the field was a man. He was just watching us. He was not waving his arms, not yelling at us, just watching. I alerted my friends, and we looked at him together. I awkwardly waved, and he continued to just stand there and not wave back. We were sufficiently creeped out, so we jumped onto our bikes to get away. We were on gravel, which is not easy to bike on, so it took us a while to get going. We biked away, and I repeatedly turned around to see if he was there and still watching us. He barely moved, and only turned his body slightly to angle in our direction to keep watching. I can't get over how he just appeared in the middle of the field like that. Eventually, once we had biked a good distance away, we saw him start walking away out of our view. Recently, I've been thinking about this, so my friend, her brother, and I started a group chat. We all shared what we remembered, and they both recalled it the same way I did. What I didn't know was that when we went back the next day, everything was gone, even the red paint on the floor. A week later, whoever owned the shack donated it to the fire department to be burned. I don't know what was going on in that shack. Some thoughts have been weird rituals, target practice for some militia dude, or just some creepy guy who had a poor taste in decor. Whatever it was, it still weirds me out to this day. This happened at night in the middle of nowhere about 8 years ago. It was after 11 p.m. and I was taking my dogs out for their last bathroom walk before bed. At the time, I was living in a rural area. Houses far apart, lots of wooded lots around, with wild pigs often crossing our path. I would often take long walks, because one of the dogs had a problem with having accidents in the morning if he didn't have an adequate walk to do all his business. It was dark, so I had the flashlight, and I was not expecting to meet anyone out in the middle of nowhere so late at night, But ahead of me appeared on the opposite side of the road another flashlight. We had a few neighbors, but of the homes around, I knew most all of them from over the years. On rare occasions, someone else may be walking a dog, but I could count the times that happened on my fingers. As I passed by the other flashlight at night, I noticed a tall, pale man who I had never seen before cross the street to my side and began to follow behind me. He yelled out, "Hey, I like your dogs. Can I pet them?" I stayed calm, walking briskly and ignoring him. My house was close, and I was almost home at the end of my walk. He continued to follow me, yelling, "Hey, what's your name? I just want to pet your dogs." He had a thick East European accent. I ignored him and ran up to my house through the door, locked it, and then ran into my bedroom. I told my husband that there was a strange man who had followed me home, and that I was super disturbed that he knew where I lived. My brave husband immediately ran out of the house, I guess to find this guy. I was on pins and needles waiting for him to come back. He came back home with his steel baseball bat in hand. He said he had caught up to the guy and asked him who he was and why he was following around a woman at basically midnight being a creep. The guy said he was new to town and was walking around hoping to meet people and make some friends. Basically, his story was bizarre and totally didn't make sense. You don't do that at midnight in a rural area in the middle of nowhere. You do that in a city setting at a normal hour. My husband told him that if he ever saw him again near our house, he would break his knees with the baseball bat. And I didn't see him again until 2 years later in a neighboring city. I was out with a girlfriend looking at an art museum when I turned a corner and it was him. I could never forget his face. He looked straight at me, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but I knew who he was from that night 2 years ago, which was still very strange. He said something like, "Oh, you're the girl from that night with the dogs." I don't remember what I even said back, because I was in disbelief. The exact same guy, again with the thick European accent, tall, skinny, and pale. This time I had run into him in a public museum, so I can't fault him much since it was a public place, but it was still creepy that he remembered me from the dark night 2 years ago. I grabbed my friend's arm and quickly walked in the opposite direction, and we left the museum. I told her the story as we left the museum, and thankfully she understood. Also thankfully, I never saw him again. Back when I was in college in Texas, my roommates and I decided to drive to Boulder, Colorado for spring break. It was another girl and I, along with our 2 male roommates. To maximize our time in Boulder, we decided to take shifts driving and go all the way through the night rather than stopping for overnight stays. It was roughly an 18-hour trip. So I was driving my shift when we reached the Texas Panhandle in the early morning hours. We were out in the middle of nowhere and had not seen a single car in either direction for ages when we noticed headlights behind us. The car came up on us quickly, then followed behind for some time. Oddly, it would get really close to us, then back off real far, then get close again. This pattern continued for several miles. Suddenly, the headlights were joined by red and blue police lights. It was so dark out there that we had not seen the light bar on the hood and had not realized we were being followed by a cop. I checked my speedometer and I was not speeding, so we were all wondering why we were getting pulled over, but I went ahead and pulled over to the shoulder. Up came a cop wearing a cowboy hat to my window. He shined his light in the car and looked us over, then asked me to get out of the car. I hesitated at first, but there were 3 other people in the car, so I wasn't feeling particularly unsafe at this point. I grabbed my wallet, got out, and stood against the driver's door. The cop looked at my license and insurance, then told me that he was going to do a sobriety test. I was thinking, why would I need to do that? But I haven't had anything to drink, so I did it anyways. The way the cop directed me for the walking in a straight line test had me ending my walk right by his car. When I finished, he reached over to open his back passenger's door and told me to get in. I said, "What? Why?" He said that I should sit in his car while he looked up my license. Now, I had heard how doors on the back of cop cars can only open from the outside, so I knew if I got into his car and he closed the door, I wouldn't be able to get out. It was like 3 a.m. in the morning, pitch black darkness, on a road dozens of miles from any civilization, and I decided I was not getting in that car. My exact words were, "I'm sorry, sir, with all respect and for my own safety, I do not want to get into the back of your car." He angrily responded with, "What did you say to me?" I repeated my statement again, being as nice as possible about it, and I stayed calm the whole time. He went back and forth like this for several minutes, with him being really angry and threatening to arrest my friends and I and hold us overnight. Finally, he gave up trying to get me into the back of his car, and he said to me, "What are you afraid of, being kidnapped?" Personally, I thought that was a really strange and messed up thing to say. I glanced towards my car and saw my friends piled to the back window watching, with the two guys looking ready to jump out. The cop turned to look at them too. I don't know what went through his mind, but after being completely aggressive with me for what seemed like forever, he finally gave me a creepy smile. He handed me back my license and insurance, tipped his hat, and then got into his car and drove off. He didn't give me a ticket or even mention what I had done wrong or why he had pulled me over. At that point, I was shaking so badly that my friends had to help me get back in the car. To this day, I think about that cop deciding to terrorize a young college female at 3 a.m. in the middle of rural Texas, and I often wonder what would have happened if I had not stood my ground and instead gotten inside of his cop car. I wondered if he would have tried to take advantage of me in the backseat of his car, and I also wonder if he was even a real cop or not. One night, in the middle of nowhere, I had a freaky situation happen to me. I was visiting my grandma, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She had a house on the lake, and to get there required driving down a long dirt road for many miles. It wasn't a very popular lake, so she didn't have any neighbors, the closest houses being at least a mile or two away. Because it was such a long drive, whenever I visited, I would just naturally stay the night in her guest bedroom so that I wouldn't have to drive long, tiring hours in the darkness. One night when I was visiting my grandma, I was sitting out on her back patio just hanging out listening to music. It was close to midnight, and my grandma had gone to bed already, so I was just enjoying the nice night air while sitting outside on my phone. Over the sound of my music, I thought I heard something banging or clanking around. There was a steady breeze that night, so I just expected it to be the wind moving something and making noise down by the boathouse. However, as the night continued, I also saw some quick flashes of light from down by the dock and the boathouse, and I knew that somebody had to be messing around down there. I was nervous because I was out in the middle of nowhere and isolated enough that there shouldn't be anybody nearby, let alone looking around down by my grandma's boathouse. I thought about calling the cops, but decided against it because it would take over an hour for them to arrive most likely. Instead, I turned off the music and went inside to grab my grandma's revolver, which I knew she kept loaded. Upon coming back outside the patio, I saw occasional movements of light down by the boathouse, so I decided to confront whoever it was now that I had a weapon. I called out to stop messing around by the dock and to reveal themselves and leave the property. I assumed that whoever it was would simply just leave without revealing who they were, but to my surprise, the figure of a tall, skinny man stepped out onto the dock. Illuminated by the moonlight, all I could see was his figure at first, but as he approached, I saw that it was an older gentleman. He casually began walking up the dock and towards where I was standing on the back patio, as if he had been doing nothing wrong. He didn't say anything as he slowly kept approaching, so I yelled out to stop and leave the property or else I'd shoot. I thought for sure that would be enough warning for him, but he just kept coming up the lawn towards me. I finally took a warning shot right above his head to stop him from advancing. After I had fired the shot, he put up his hands and spoke to me for the first time, saying to take it easy and relax. Fully creeped out by the demeanor of this old skinny man, I told him to leave immediately or I would shoot him. The man stood still for a couple seconds, and I thought that he might start walking towards me again and I'd have to shoot him. However, he turned back and walked out into the woods, back down to the left of the dock, and disappeared. I was worried the rest of the night and didn't get much sleep, half expecting him to come back, but he never did. I'm not sure what his deal was and why he was so comfortable and nonchalant about approaching me while at gunpoint. The following morning, I warned my grandma about it, just in case he ever came around again. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I live in the countryside of Ireland, far from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually pretty quiet, which is nice. Most nights, the only sounds I hear are the occasional cow escaping the field next door or my dog barking at someone walking by. But about 2 years ago, I heard something really strange. It was late spring, and the night sky was clear. I remember stepping into the kitchen around midnight for a snack. As I rummaged through the cupboards, I began to hear noises outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds only grew louder. I opened up the window to listen better, and I saw my dog standing by the back door. She wasn't barking, which was strange because she usually barks at anything, especially animals. Instead, she was focused on the forest behind our house. The noise was hard to describe, but it was like metal being scraped, but it had a croaky quality to it. I didn't like it, and the fact that my dog was scared made me uneasy, because she was a big dog and not easily frightened. I couldn't understand what could be out there, so I decided to bring her inside and go to bed. But as I lay in my room, the sound seemed to follow me. It shifted to the front of the house, which didn't make sense. I shut my curtains, hoping to block out whatever was outside. Just as I got comfortable, I heard a tap on my window. It was soft at first, but then it became a steady tapping noise. It sounded like stones being thrown against the glass. I stayed under the covers, just listening and hoping that it would stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the night to my neighbors. That's when I found out a man had moved into a house just around the corner. They said he wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and he had a history of trouble with the law, so much so that whispers about him being a drug dealer floated around. About a month later, a massive stash of drugs was discovered in a shed nearby, and we never saw that man again after that. Thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that he might have been trying to scare me that night while he was high or something, but it was just all so strange. Like, how did he create that sound for hours? And how did the sound move around the outside of my house so quickly? What unsettled me the most was the thought of what could have happened if I had gone to check on the noise. I'm still not 100% sure of what it was, but it freaked me out. A few years ago, I visited some friends out in Oregon who lived on a secluded 300-acre property in the middle of nowhere. We were deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sounds of nature. On the second evening, we were sitting around a fire pit enjoying each other's company as the sun was setting, making the whole sky orange. There was a total of 6 of us there, and 2 of my friends had brought their kids who were busy making s'mores. The others were having casual conversation, and I was comfortable in my folding chair, leaning back and zoning out, just staring into the darkness. After a while, I noticed something strange. I kept staring at this one particular tree, trying to figure out what I was seeing. After I kept looking at it, I deciphered what looked like a giant hand wrapped around the trunk of the tree. I quickly turned to my friend Anthony, who was sitting closest to me, telling him to take a look at the tree. I motioned with my hand, telling him the direction to look. He also couldn't determine what he was seeing at first, but I told him to just keep looking and focus on it. Finally, he saw what I was seeing and whispered to me, "Is that a hand?" It blended in so well with the bark of the tree, but the more we looked at it, the more certain we were it was a massive hand gripping the tree. The fingers were thick, almost like tree bark. They had ridges and cracks, giving them a rough appearance. It was bizarre, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I felt goosebumps cover my arms as we both stared at the hand. It was about 15 meters away, and it didn't move at all. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The kids were laughing and joking around the fire, and we didn't want to alert anyone else in fear of scaring the kids. After 8 long minutes, the grip of the hand suddenly loosened and disappeared behind the tree into the darkness of the forest. The movement of the hand disappearing confirmed to both Anthony and I that it wasn't an illusion. Anthony and I looked at each other wide-eyed and speechless, feeling that we had seen something that didn't belong in our world. Later that night, we finally got up from our chairs, and we wanted to check out the area where we had seen the hand. We walked towards the tree. When we reached it, we both paused, taking in its massive trunk. It was at least 2 feet in circumference, and it was hard to imagine how something with a hand could be that big. I inspected the ground around the base of the tree, looking for any signs of footprints, scratches, or anything that could explain what we had seen. But there was nothing. No imprints in the dirt, and no smell like you would expect from a wild animal. I've heard tons of stories of man-like creatures residing in the deep woods, and I'm a believer now. Whatever that thing was bigger than any regular human, and based off the size of the tree that its hand was wrapped around, it had to have been huge. This is a true story of something that happened to me and a few friends a couple of decades ago when I was still a teenager. My family had just moved from a big city to a quiet area in England basically in the middle of nowhere. My new house was half a mile from an old ruin of a castle called Barry Pomeroy. The locals always said that the castle was haunted, but tours of the castle were regularly given during the daytime, so I didn't really believe it. One night, a few of my friends and I thought it would be fun to explore the castle at night. It was around 9 p.m. when we went to check it out. There was still plenty of light to see, but the summer sky was darkening. We walked up the valley, taking the steep footpath to the castle's gatehouse. We knew that we could sneak in pretty easily by climbing over a ruined wall, and at this point, they didn't employ guards yet to keep people from sneaking in at night. Once inside, we moved through the old dining room and climbed the ramparts to take in the views. It was dark by now, and the moonlight cast long shadows everywhere, making it a bit creepy. We were having fun though, and eventually decided to check out the dungeon. As we descended the stone staircase, we noticed tiny candles flickering on the steps. Tours for the day had been finished for many hours now, and the candles were freshly lit. At the bottom, we found what looked like a shrine. There were candles arranged in a circle, and something was drawn on the wall behind it. I don't remember the details of the drawing, but it felt eerie. The candles and the thought of someone else being in the dungeon area made us uneasy, so we quickly went back up the staircase. When we reached the top of the staircase, I realized my friend Alan was missing. I called out his name, and after looking around, we saw a figure walking around on the ramparts. He must have chickened out and never came down to the dungeons, even though we thought he was with us. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. Alan was coming up the stairs after lagging a bit behind, and was asking why I was shouting his name. Sure enough, I turned to see Alan standing behind me now. My heart dropped as we looked back up towards the ramparts. The shadowy figure I had seen that I thought was Alan was still up on the ramparts, watching us. It didn't move for a moment, then slowly slipped behind a pillar and vanished. We were all on edge now and decided it was best to leave. We hurried back the way we had gotten in, climbed over the wall and headed towards the footpath through the woods. As we walked, I glanced back at the castle. It loomed in the darkness, and I noticed the figure again. This time, it was perched on top of the wall, moving along it as if it was following us. As quickly as we could, we hurried down the path, trying to keep our footing in the uneven ground. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I looked back again. The castle seemed even more imposing now. This time, when I looked back, I saw a faint blue light glowing on the wall. It drifted slowly, then disappeared over the edge of the castle. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. That was the first and last time I ever experienced something I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just some guy trying to scare us off, but I couldn't shake the image of that blue light fading away. It looked so supernatural, and I began believing that the castle indeed was haunted. When I was about 13, my family lived in a remote area in the middle of nowhere, Canada. One winter night, I decided to unwind in the hot tub on our deck. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and the world was quiet, blanketed in knee-deep snow from a recent snowfall. As I sat there watching the trees and listening to the night sounds, something caught my eye. Emerging from the darkness of the woods was a massive wolf. It was unlike any wolf I had ever seen. Its silver coat shimmered in the moonlight, and its green eyes pierced through the night. The wolf walked along the fence that bordered the property. For a moment, it paused and locked eyes with me. I was up on the deck, and the wolf was far away below, but I was still terrified, and I sat as still as possible, waiting to see what would happen. The wolf continued on its path towards the barn where our horses were kept. As it approached the barn, there was a light on the outside on the other side that illuminated the inside just a bit. The barn was dark inside, but I could clearly see the outline of the wolf moving through the barn. Halfway through the barn, the shape of the wolf totally shifted. It was like it morphed into something more human-like, although it was big with broad-shouldered, and seemed to stand at least 7 feet tall. The horses weren't skittish at all and were completely silent, which was strange. The tall figure rounded the corner, but did not appear on the other side of the barn. I strained to see if it would reemerge from behind the barn at some point, but it never did. It must have just vanished into the darkness on the other side of the barn. I had no idea if there was a trick going on with the light and shadows inside the barn, but I had no idea what I had just seen, and I had never seen a wolf that big. Later, I found that my brother had experienced something similar. He told me that he woke up one night feeling a strange sensation, like he was being watched. When he looked out of his window, he saw the same large wolf walking away from his window. I have yet to see the wolf again, and I wonder if I ever want to. I travel quite a bit for my job, and most of the time I drive myself. It takes me all over the country, and typically I enjoy it a lot, but I've had some interesting experiences. One of those happened 2 years ago now. I was driving home, but still a good distance away. I was somewhere in Arkansas, I believe, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. For some reason, I was not on the highway, but a quieter road. I don't recall if there was construction or if I took a wrong turn or what, but on both sides of the road was just grass and occasionally trees or woods. I remember that my signal went out on my phone. Obviously, I had directions on my phone, but they soon went away with my signal. Nothing would load, and I had to just hope that I was going in the right direction. Soon it became later and later at night. I hadn't booked a hotel, but had been planning to do so when I stopped for gas. Eventually, I remember that my car made a noise, and I realized that I was running low on gas. Meanwhile, I still had no service. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded out here with no signal and no fuel. I decided that I would take the next exit and hope that there was a gas station up ahead. So about a mile later, I saw a road on the right that looked promising. I turned down it and started driving. Soon I saw a sign for a gas station, but it was down yet another road. The sign said that it was 4 miles down that road. It seemed pretty far, but I could make it, so I drove the 4 miles and soon arrived at the gas station. When I got there, I saw that it was certainly in the middle of nowhere. There were some trees and wild land around it, but other than that, there were no other businesses or anything nearby. I parked next to one of the gas pumps, and I checked my phone. It still had no service. I looked to the convenience store connected to the gas station, but it was closed. Luckily, I could still get gas. I got out of my car, and it was crazy how quiet it was. I started fueling my car, and I looked around. There were no other cars driving by or anything. But when I was looking around, I looked into the direction of the small convenience store building. There was a man standing kind of behind it and on the side. He appeared to be looking right at me. I was wondering who he was and what he was doing there. It was really sketchy. I couldn't see many details about the man because of how dark it was and how far away he was from me. I looked away and casually looked elsewhere. But I had a bad feeling about the guy and thought about being done getting gas even though the tank wasn't full. However, I was in the middle of nowhere and knew that I needed the fuel, so I let it run. I looked back over to the direction of the man and he was still there and still looking at me. This was creepy to say the least. Just when my gas tank was full, I started to take the pump out and noticed the man disappear behind the building. I was glad that he was gone and also wondered what he was doing. I got inside my car, breathing a sigh of relief. Then I started the engine and checked my phone yet again for service. I still had nothing. I was about to drive away when I noticed a car driving around from behind the gas station, and I don't even think that car had been on the road. I'm pretty sure behind the building was just dirt. I realized that it was likely the man that had been watching me. I started to drive away and saw the headlights of the car behind me. When I left the parking lot, the car followed me. Now I was once again really creeped out. Whoever this guy was following me. It seemed like he had his brights on as well. I couldn't tell any details of what the guy looked like. I moved over to the side of the road, hoping that he would pass me, but he stayed on me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't drive to a police station because I didn't know where any of them were. I also didn't have any service on my phone, so I couldn't call the police or look up directions to anywhere. At least I had a full tank of gas though. I would have to just drive and hope to find a place that I could go or lose the tail of the car. I drove back towards the highway that I had previously been on. But after going straight for a while, I panicked and turned. When I drove down that street a little ways, I turned again. I really had no clue where I was going. I just felt like if I turned a lot, maybe the guy behind me would get tired of following me. He didn't seem to though, and remained right on my tail. Eventually, I made it to a slightly larger and busier road. However, nobody else was out. I didn't see a single other vehicle.
The guy remained right behind me as I drove down this road for a while. Soon I turned again, and I turned at just about every single opportunity that I got. After driving around and randomly turning for probably 15 more minutes, I decided to just go straight for a while. I didn't know where I was, but honestly, I was tired of turning. I drove down that street for a few minutes. Then, suddenly, the car behind me just turned onto a random road. I had to look twice, and I couldn't believe my eyes, but it was finally gone. I kept driving, and then I turned onto another road in case the car changed its mind. From there, I checked my phone, but still had no service. I decided to just keep driving down that road until I got a signal again. It took me almost an hour, but finally I had coverage. I first looked up directions to a nearby town. I found a hotel room and then called the police and reported the whole situation. I'm not sure if that man was ever located. I still wonder who he was and what he was doing, and I'm really glad that I made it out of there okay. This happened many years ago when I was a kid. I was probably about 10 years old or so. I remember that my parents and I would go to my uncle's house sometimes. My uncle lives in a pretty big house on a large property, but he lives way out in the country where there's nothing else around. It was like 40 minutes away, but we had a lot of family gatherings there because of the space. Between the land and the nice house, it was the best place for all of us to meet. When we went there though, I would always be bored. All of my cousins are much older than I am, so I didn't really have anybody to talk to. So one time when we were there, I was bored, so I went outside. My uncle had a basketball hoop behind the house, and I was messing around over there. There was also a huge woods in my uncle's yard. I'm not sure if all of it was on his property or not, but there was a trail going into the woods. I got curious and decided to walk down it to see what it was like. I had never been on the trail, but I had heard about it. When I first started to walk down it, it was just like any other trail in the woods. It was pretty dense on both sides, and the trail was not very wide. I kept walking, and several minutes later reached an area where the trail was less paved. It seemed like it wasn't really maintained much at this point. The grass was longer, and then there was an option to go left or right. I think I went left, and I just kept going down that trail. It was pretty interesting to me, because I didn't have a lot of hiking experience. It was also more entertaining for me than sitting in my uncle's house with nobody to hang out with. So I walked down random trails and turned several more times for the next 20 minutes or so, probably. Then I decided that I wanted to head back, except I no longer knew the way. It was something that I didn't think about when I was going farther in. I started to panic a little bit when I realized that I had no clue how to get back. Back when I was a kid, I didn't have a smartphone at age 10 like kids seem to nowadays. I was on my own to figure it out. I tried to retrace my steps for the next several minutes. It was during this time when I heard a noise a ways behind me. My first thought was that it was some kind of an animal, and I was terrified. I was thinking it might be a bear or a mountain lion or something. As I kept walking and tried to go faster, I continued to hear the noise behind me. I looked back, but saw nothing at first, because it was too far behind me. As I kept walking, I continued to hear the noise a ways back. It sort of sounded like it was getting closer to me, but I also realized that it didn't sound like an animal anymore, but a person. It didn't really make me feel much better though, and I was still scared, because who would be walking out in this woods? When I got to a straight point in the path, I looked behind me and just briefly saw a man walking. I didn't know who he was. He was tall, sort of thin, and he was looking down, so I didn't get a good look at his face. But I tried to walk even faster than I already was. I was desperately trying to find my way back to my uncle's, but I had no clue if I was heading in the right direction. I turned a few times when there were options to in the trails. I'm not even sure if my uncle made these trails or if they were animal trails now. But every time I turned, the guy behind me seemed to turn the same way. He was very slowly getting closer, but for the most part maintaining the same distance. When the trail was going around a sharp turn, I took the corner and then I dashed into the woods. It was very thick at that part, but I didn't know what else to do. I ran in and then hid in a bush. I was laying on the ground and I got all kinds of scratched up in the process, but I soon heard the man walking. I remember hearing him go off the trail a little bit and I got really nervous. He was walking around sort of in the area I was, but after that he moved along. He remained off the trail, and I'm 90% sure that he was looking for me. I soon heard him go farther away, and then I stopped hearing him altogether. I kept hiding where I was for a good 10 minutes at least, I would guess. I was afraid that he was still there someplace, but when I finally got up the courage to leave my hiding spot, I did not see the man. I then left and went back to the trail. I still had no clue where I was though, so I just started walking in the opposite direction that the man had gone. For like 10 minutes, I just kept going down the path, and then by a miracle, I saw my uncle's yard in the distance. I ran for it and had finally made it back. I had probably been gone for about an hour. After going back inside my uncle's house, I found my parents and told them what had happened. Then we found my uncle, and I asked him who the guy in the woods would be. He said that nobody else should be back there, and his property went on for many acres. So my uncle went out there and was in the woods for a while, but he came back and said that he didn't see anybody. My uncle said there was really no other property nearby. That made it even more creepy to me. I was really scared when the man was following me, but I sort of thought maybe it was a neighbor. I thought maybe I wandered into his property or something. Knowing that he was trespassing makes it even more scary. After that, I didn't go in my uncle's woods alone anymore. This happened just last year. I was driving home and making a relatively long drive. It was going to take me about 4 hours, and I was also driving a majority of it at night. I had the directions on my phone and had it in my phone holder in front of me and to my right. As I was driving at night, I was listening to music and not paying much attention to the maps. I had been driving on one really long highway for over an hour, and in the process, I missed the exit that I was supposed to take. That would have led me to another highway, but instead, I was going in the wrong direction for like 30 minutes. When I finally realized my mistake, the directions were telling me to go off of the highway. I then had to take a bunch of back roads to connect to the highway that I needed to go on. It was a shortcut, but it was going through seemingly the middle of nowhere. By this time, the roads were extremely dark and quiet as well. I didn't see many other cars out. One of the roads that I was driving on was particularly quiet. I was going pretty slow, and after driving on that road for about a mile, my directions told me to turn left. After making the turn, I instantly saw somebody lying on the road up ahead. It appeared to be a man laying on his side and facing away from me. It was so weird that right away I was suspicious of it. He was like directly in the middle of the road and would block anyone from going by. The man wasn't moving. I wanted to just get out of there, but possibly the man needed help. I stopped my car a ways back from him. On the side of me was the woods, and on the other side was a grassy area with a few trees here and there. There was hardly any light at all. As my car was sitting there on the road, I wanted to see if the man was okay, but I didn't want to get out. I rolled down my window and yelled, asking the man if he was okay. He didn't move or say anything. Then I decided to call the police. I took my phone from the holder and started to dial. As I was looking down at my phone and doing so, something caught the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw a man coming out of the woods and going right towards my car. When I saw this, I then saw the man who had been lying on the road start to get up. It was a trap. I knew it. I put my car into reverse and floored it, and I started reversing and moving away from the guys. But obviously, I wasn't used to going in reverse at high speeds. I wasn't really going that fast, and it was kind of hard to control my car going backwards. I couldn't really see where I was going either, and the men both started chasing after me. They were almost catching up, but when I made it back to the turn that I had come around, I put a little bit of distance between us. Then I slammed on my brakes and turned, so I was then facing the direction of the new road. The men almost caught up with me when I was stopped for a second, but I was able to drive away just before they reached me. I got out of there and then called the police when I was a distance away from them. I gave the exact location of where it occurred, and then I took another route to where I needed to go. I hope that the police found those guys, or they didn't try whatever it was someplace else. I made it back home a little bit later than I had hoped that night, but I made it back safe, and that's what really matters. I used to live in the middle of nowhere for my job. I would move about every year for the first couple of years that I worked at the company. All of the cities that I lived in were cool in their own way, but this one in particular was way out there. There was lots of wildlife and land nearby, but not much of a city. I was able to live in a pretty nice house because of the location. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a mansion or anything, but it was a lot nicer than the other places that I had lived. One thing I liked to do was go for runs to get exercise. I would go run along the side of nearby roads. There were no sidewalks way out there, but the streets were never very busy. Not that many people drove on the roads near my house with how quiet of an area it was, so I could easily jog on the side of the road without any worries. One night when I got back from work, I went out for a run. I worked all kinds of hours, so I would get off at all different times. It was a little bit later this time, but I still had a lot of energy. So after work, I left my house and went onto my street. Then I connected to a little bit of a busier road. And by busier, I only mean that it was a larger road. There would still rarely be any cars that went down it. It was probably about 9 o'clock at night or so. I started jogging on the side of the road, and this road went down for miles, so usually I would just run along it and then turn around and go back after a while. Probably 10 minutes in, a car passed me by, traveling at a pretty slow speed. I didn't pay it any attention to what it did after it went past me, but it must have turned somewhere and then gone back without me noticing, maybe on another road, because several minutes later, I saw the same car coming from the same direction as before. I thought maybe it was a different car that was the same make and model, but that's a pretty strange coincidence. I was pretty focused on running and not looking around, but I still noticed that was weird. The car slowly went past me, and then when it got a ways up, started to pull over on the side of the road. I was wondering what was going on. This was the middle of nowhere. Maybe the person was lost. As the car was pulling over on the same side of the road that I was running on, it then turned, and was sort of at an angle where it was right in my way. I was going to have to either go way up on the grass to pass them, or way out into the road. As I approached, I was planning to go up into the grass, but then the car's door opened up. I saw a man starting to step out, who was wearing all black clothing and a ski mask. When I saw that, I started to turn around immediately. The guy was still a ways up. I continued to jog, but now was going in the opposite direction. I didn't look back, but I heard the sound of the guy getting back inside the car. Soon, I heard the car starting to drive after me again. As the car started approaching, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have my phone on me. When I went out jogging, I wouldn't bring anything. I just had my Fitbit on and my one house key. I didn't like running with things in my pockets, so I wouldn't be able to call for help or anything, but I never figured that I would have to living way out here. The guy in the car would easily be able to catch up with me soon though. But then I got extremely lucky. I saw another car driving down the road towards me up ahead. The other car was still following me from behind, but I then ran into the middle of the road. I started trying to wave down the other car that was coming in my direction so that it would stop. The car slowed down, and as it was stopping, the car that was following me went around us and drove past. The driver of the car that stopped rolled down their window, and I think they were starting to ask me what was going on. I pointed to the other car and I told them that they had been following me. I watched the car go out of sight. Then I quickly ran back towards my house. I was able to make it back to my street and then go to my house. When I got home, I called the police and reported it. After that, I stopped jogging outside at night. It was so crazy for that to happen there, because the area was literally in the middle of nowhere. I don't live there anymore, but I still think about that experience all the time. Two years ago, I went on a road trip with my girlfriend. We were traveling across the country and stopping at a lot of parks. Most of the ones we were trying to go to were state parks, but not all of them. We both like to go hiking and that sort of stuff. My girlfriend is a lot more into it than I am, but I do enjoy it. On this road trip in particular, we were probably like 5 days in, and everything was going well. We'd seen lots of cool places, and we were out west somewhere. I don't even remember the exact state. It was either New Mexico, Colorado, or Arizona. Anyways, it was approaching sunset, and we had just been to a park a couple of hours ago. Now we were driving to our next hotel, which was still a few hours away, but I remember that my girlfriend really liked this particular area that we were in. She saw a sign for a park and asked me to stop and look at it. So I took the exit, which led to a somewhat quiet road. The land was a mixture of mountains and deserts. We drove along this road for a few miles and then saw a small parking lot for a hiking path. My girlfriend asked me to pull in. She then wanted to know if I was down for a quick hike or to just look around. If I had to estimate, I would say that we had about 20 minutes of daylight left before things got really dark. I said all right because it was a pretty cool area. So we parked and then got out of the car. Our car was the only one in the entire parking lot, and the road by it was very quiet as well. We got out and started walking on the trail. I remember about 10 minutes into it, we took some pictures of the scenery. My girlfriend mentioned that she had no service, and I looked at my phone and I didn't have any either. So we walked a little bit farther, and by then it was getting really dark, so we started heading back. This particular trail was sort of tough terrain as well. It was a lot of hills and rocks and trees. We eventually made it back to the beginning of the trail. When we approached the entrance to the parking lot though, I noticed something. There was another car in the parking lot. When I got closer, I saw that there was somebody standing right outside of our vehicle. I was walking in front of my girlfriend and I stopped and motioned for her to do the same. We went to the side a little bit next to a giant rock. We were mostly obstructed from the view of whoever was in the parking lot. I told my girlfriend what I had seen. The person at the car looked like maybe they were going to try to break into my car or something. Then I decided to look around the corner of the rock to get a better view. But when I looked, I saw that the person was now walking towards us. I moved back and we both headed the opposite way back down the trail. By now, it was almost completely dark out. I knew something was going on. The person didn't say anything, but soon entered the trail behind us. My girlfriend and I then went off trail. We went up on top of a rock and then went through some brush. It got really steep at one point, but we were able to then cut back around. We did not make our way back to the path, but went off path in the direction of the parking lot. Within a minute or two, we got back to the parking lot coming out of some brush. I heard the person somewhere behind us. We then ran for the car and got inside quickly. Then I drove out of there. When we were leaving and driving down the street, I saw the person emerging from where we had. I got back to another road after that, and we weren't followed or anything. After that, we didn't make any more stops near sunset. I'm not sure who that person was. It wasn't any kind of park official, because their car was an old beater, and the person was not wearing any kind of a uniform. Plus, the way they were standing at my car was like they were trying to open the door or look inside. I'm really glad that we were able to get away from that guy, whoever he was.
A few years back, when I was in college, I used to work real late nights during the summer. I had an internship with a company that was way out in the middle of nowhere. Miles surrounding the area were just woods and fields. About a month into the job, I finished work one night at about 3 a.m. and then got into my car to drive home. It would usually take me about 20 minutes to get back to my temporary apartment that I lived in for the summer. About halfway through the drive, I started to hear my car sputter. It was an old beater because I was in college and I didn't have much money. I did what I could to keep the car going, but it ended up dying and slowly coming to a stop on the side of the road. This road was completely empty with no other cars in sight, and it was surrounded by a little ditch with woods on both sides. I tried starting the car multiple times, but I realized that it wasn't going to do much good. I wasn't much of a car expert, and I honestly had no clue what to do. I knew it wasn't out of gas, so I decided to call my roadside assistance. I was told due to my location it would take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour for them to arrive. I decided to play on my phone and watch YouTube videos until they got there, so I took out my headphones and put them in. After I would guess about 15 or 20 minutes, I was interrupted by the sound of my back door trying to be opened. My doors were locked, and I figured the roadside service was there, so I took out my headphones and looked behind me expecting to see a truck, but nothing was there at all. The moon was fairly big that night, so I could see around pretty well due to the light, but I didn't see anybody. I spent a good minute just looking around trying to figure out who was trying to open my door. I knew what I heard, and I wasn't imagining it.
Then my eyes scanned around to the woods, and I saw a tree move. When I looked closer, I saw what appeared to be a man digging at the base of a tree just inside the woods. He was wearing a green jacket and appeared to have brown hair and a dark-colored beard. That's all I was able to make out. He was on his knees and digging with his hands. The sight of it gave me a very creepy feeling. The thought of the man possibly trying to get into my car made me even more scared. So many questions went through my head, like who was this man and why was he in the middle of nowhere digging in the woods with his hands? The man continued to dig for several more minutes. I just sat in my car, being as still as I could, hoping he wouldn't come over to me. This went on for what felt like forever. Finally, I saw headlights behind me and a truck which was roadside service. When they pulled up, I saw the man turn and go deeper into the woods. But he didn't get up and run. He left on all fours like he was some sort of an animal. I was more than happy to get out of there, and very shortly after that, I got a new car. Hopefully nothing like that ever happens again. This story occurred in 2015. At the time, my wife and I had recently got a cabin far up north from where we lived. We intended on going up there to get away from things from time to time. The very first time we went up there, we planned on spending the weekend there, arriving on Friday and leaving on Sunday. It took about 4 hours to get there, and it was a pretty nice place. There was a lake surrounded by wilderness with cabins spread out very far away from each other. We really liked how secluded it was from everything else. Once we got there on Friday afternoon, we did some fishing and then went inside to go to bed. The cabin had pretty much just a little kitchen, a living room, a bathroom, and a bedroom. It wasn't that big at all, but had a comfortable amount of space. At about midnight, when we were just starting to fall asleep, we heard a knocking at our front door. I had no clue who could be knocking on the door at this time, or who would even know that we were here. It was very strange, but I decided to get up and go see. I slowly got out of bed and walked out of the bedroom. By the time I was out of the bedroom and into the living room, the knocking got a lot harder and turned into more of a pounding. This alarmed me a little bit more. The way the cabin was, you couldn't really see outside to the front of it unless you were in the kitchen window. Instead of going straight to the door, I decided to go to the window instead based on how violent the knocks were becoming. I slowly tiptoed to the kitchen window. As I did, the knocks grew even louder. By this time they were so hard, I feared that the door might break. I saw my wife start to come out of the bedroom, and I signaled for her to be quiet. As I looked out the window, all I could see was a large man with his back facing me, pounding on the door. He had to be 6.5 feet tall and weigh at least 250 pounds. He was wearing a hat, and I couldn't get a good look at his face at all. I considered my options of what I could do. I decided to turn on my porch light, hoping that it would scare him off. Looking back, it was probably dumb, but I didn't know what to do. When I turned on the light, the man was unfazed and just kept pounding. I remained sitting on the floor next to the window, just hoping he would go away. Finally, he did. I knew that was the only entrance to the cabin, so I felt relieved. But then, I started to hear pounding coming from the back of the cabin at the wall. My wife and I stayed put in an area where we couldn't be seen. Thankfully, we had shades covering all of our windows. The pounding continued at the rear of the cabin for about 5 minutes and then finally stopped. We sat there waiting for more to start up again somewhere, but it didn't. After about an hour of sitting up and discussing what had just happened, we finally decided to go back to bed. I didn't get a whole lot of sleep that night, and the next morning we went outside and saw that there were marks on our door as well as the wall at the back of our cabin from the man. There were also some plants that had been trampled. We considered leaving and driving back that day, but decided to stay. After another day of fishing and walking through the woods, we saw no one at all, which was nice, and then we went back to the cabin.
We had a relaxing night watching a movie and then went to bed once again at about midnight. Then I heard a knocking on the front door again. As soon as I did, my heart sunk. Once again, the knocking slowly grew louder and louder. We decided to just wait it out and hope that the man didn't break the door down. It lasted for roughly 10 minutes, and finally the man left again. I think I got even less sleep that night. The next morning, my wife and I went outside and saw a piece of paper that was on the ground in front of the door. It had the words, "Get out," written on it. We decided to report what had happened to the police, and after filling out a report with them, we drove home. I don't think anything was found, and we decided to sell the cabin and get another one elsewhere. I'm not sure who the man was, or if it was just someone trying to scare us, but we were enjoying our new cabin much more. This story happened roughly 15 years ago. I was on my way driving back from college. I attended a school in Florida and lived in the Midwest, so it would always be a long drive back home. Usually, I would do the trip in 2 days, but on this time, I decided to drive through the night. I left my college campus and drove for many hours, only stopping for gas or food or to use the bathroom. I was actually making really good time, and when it got late at night, things got even better because traffic decreased a lot. I stopped and got some energy drinks to keep me up and drove for several hours. Then at about 3 in the morning, my light for gas came on, which usually meant I had about 40 miles before I would run out. I was honestly in the middle of nowhere, so I decided I would stop at the next exit and see if there was a gas station. An exit eventually came up, and I took it. I went right and drove down a very quiet road for a while. It took me maybe 2 or 3 miles, and I didn't really see anything, so I thought about turning around, but then I saw some lights up ahead which looked promising. The road curved a little, and then I came into a small town. The speed limit dropped all the way down to 20 miles per hour, and there was old, run-down looking buildings on each side. It honestly looked like a ghost town, but I figured they would have to have a gas station, so I slowly kept driving. But the farther I drove, I didn't see any gas station, and then there started to be mainly old houses, so I decided to turn around. I turned into a driveway, and as soon as I did, I saw the front door of the house open. An older-looking man came out and started walking to me. I made a signal with my hands that I was just turning around, and then I started backing out. The man looked a little confused. When I turned around and began driving the other direction, I saw that 2 more people were standing at the ends of their driveways, staring at me with angry looks on their faces. For some reason, it just really freaked me out. I decided to ignore it and keep driving. When I got back to the town, though, it got even worse. There were at least 10 people on each side of the road in front of the buildings, all staring at me. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. They all looked very unfriendly. As I drove the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, they started to walk into the road, almost to approach my car. I wasn't sure what else to do, so I sped up and drove faster and faster until I was out of there. I quickly got back onto the main freeway and drove until I saw another exit about 10 miles down the road. It was a close call, but I was able to find a gas station and fill my tank. I drove home after that, and I'm not even sure where that was, but something about that small town at 3 a.m. and all the people in it was just so creepy. It still gives me the chills to think about.